Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Vakratunda Mahakaya Suryakoti Samaprabha Nirvignam Kuru Me Deva Sarvakaryeshu Sarvada. Om. We seek the blessings of the divine gods, our Adi Guru, our Puja Gurus, and the Guru Parampara. Team Param Vedanta welcomes you all. Namaste. This is the 8th session of Pancadashi, Chapter 7, Tripti Deepa. We continue to reflect on the Mahavakyas. Yes, let us take time to fully imbibe the wisdom contained in them. When the Guru is telling us, Aham Brahma Asmi, a lot of doubts come up, and Vidyaranya Swami expertly resolves every one of these doubts. He then takes up the topic of how exactly self-realization takes place and why the hesitation to abide in these truths. What are the obstacles in the process of transformation from Gnanam to Gnana Nishtha? Let us learn all of this today. We begin today's session with a recap of last week's class by Dr. Kiran. Over to you, Dr. Kiran.
Namaste. Hari Om, Gurubhyo Namaha. Welcome. Tripti Deepa, the light of contentment, the light of knowledge, the light of enlightenment. The more it is shared, the more it is grown. This chapter of Pancadashi is an explanation of Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, one verse, that is, Atmanam Chet Vijanayat. If a man knows self as I am this, that is, something is there in me, then what for I desire anything? Because everything is me only. And what worries will I have? So let us delve into this chapter further. Some of the terms we learned is Paroksha Gnana, that is direct knowledge. Aparoksha Gnana. Paroksha Gnana is indirect knowledge. Aparoksha Gnana is the direct knowledge. Paroksha Gnana is often got by Avantara Vivakya, that is the supporting verses, but not always. And Aparoksha Gnana, that is imbibing the Mahavakyas, we get this. There are two types of Avarna. This Atma is always there, but many are not even aware of it. For example, the animals doesn't even know that they are seeing through eyes, but that doesn't mean that they are blind. This type of thing is called as Sattva Varna, that is got rid by knowledge. The next is Bhana Varna. I have learned all these Mahavakyas, everything. I know everything inside out, but still, something is there, some kore is there. Why is that? This is because Vasanas are covering this, and that's why we are not able to experience the real Atma Jnana. Just like how a mirror, if it is covered with the dust, we are not able to see ourselves clearly. This is also how it is got rid of. This is also by knowledge and then by preparation. Next slide, please. Last class, we studied two important things. One is we got an answer to the enigmatic 10th man, and then we delved upon Mahavakya. Dasha Maha Ka iti. When asked who is the 10th, the Guru asks him to count all the 9, and then he realized that he is the 10th. This is the direct knowledge. Always the person who is lost is the 10th man, not some Rama Sham. This is got rid of by direct knowledge. So we should know the 9 men also. That is, we should know the Jagat. And then we realize that there is something other than the Anatma, and this real person is the real I, the 10th man. Next. The 10th man counts the other 9, but he never counts himself. What a tragedy. That is what is happening in our world also. Everything we look for, we search for is ourselves, but we forget this. In Krishna, we are not looking for Krishna, but we are looking for ourselves. In Rama, we are looking for ourselves. It is you who is reflected in this world. If the world is beautiful, that is because your heart is beautiful. And just like this narcissistic, we are always searching for ourselves alone. And that's why in Upanishad it says, if you know yourself, there is nothing else to know. And next slide, please. How to know this who I am? Just by reciting who I am, we are not learn it. One of the method is reflecting upon Mahavakya, that is the knowledge we get it in it. This we should be very careful. Vedas are not system. It is a tool or pravana. Just like we use eyes to see, ears to listen, we use Mahavakya and examine the life and realizes what it is in the real sense. Let us study. What is this aparoksha jnana we always think about? What is this? Next slide. It is we don't get it merely by chanting Mahavakyas, etc., Tattvamasi, etc. There's a subtle difference between the experience and awareness. Many people get confused. This enlightenment is not experience, it is the awareness. Just like when you learn the bicycle, when you know how to ride it, you don't get some experience. You are aware of it, how to deal with the bicycle, how to ride it, etc. And that you have got it, you know it. You don't need any certificate for that. This type of knowledge is awareness. This is the aparoksha jnana. Next slide, please. Next, we get this by analyzing Mahavakyas. First, he takes upon Chandogya Upanishad. This is from Samaveda, which is a very important Upanishad. First, we get indirect knowledge by learning Eka Eva Advitiya. He says there is one thing which is Advitiya, that is non-dual. That is the preamble. Next, what is that? When you analyze Tattvamasi Shvetaketu, you are that. So when we analyze that, we come to know of the Mahavakya and Atma Jnana. The next is a very important Taittiriya Upanishad we learned, that is Bhrigu and Varuna. This is also known as Varuna Jnana. Here, he first condition he puts it, Yatato Bhutani. That means in which everything resolves it, from which everything arises. This source is you. Then you have to put this thing reference point and measure everything. Whether this world, anything is there? No, because we see everything is destroying and rebuilding, etc. This body is that? No, because we build it, it keeps on degenerating and changing. Next slide, please. And we have to contemplate not. That is the five Panchabhutas, earth, water, fire, etc. And the five koshas, Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, etc. When we analyze and get rid of it, the 10th man who remains is the real me or the real essence. Next slide, please. And another way which is beautifully presented, and perhaps it is only in Taittiriya Upanishad we get, is the Swarupa Lakshana, that is direct knowledge. Satyam Jnanam Ananta, that is pure existence, consciousness, and infinitum. This is the explanation of the Brahman or Atma. How it is done, it is not like white lotus. There can be white lotus, there can be red lotus, etc. This is not like that. Just like how sugar and sweet, wherever we find sweetness, we know sugar is there. And you can explain sugarness or sweetness only by it. There's no other reference for it. No, you can't say it is just a little bit different from salt, a little bit different from sour. No. Similarly, Satyam Jnanam Anantam together qualifies and explains the Swarupa Lakshanam of the Brahman. Next slide, please. Then, okay, I got this Brahman knowledge. Then what one confusion opposes, Tattvamasi, it has told that I am this body is the, there can be confusion that I am this body is the Brahman. That means, like one story we said that a man believes that he is a bird. Someone has convinced him that this is a bird and starts doing like this. Am I like this? If I go around telling I am Brahman, people will think I'm mad. So, is the primary meaning we take it? No. It is the Lakshartha meaning that is we take it. That is, the Tat means that which is beyond attributes, which is Asanga, which is not influenced by body-mind complex. That is the you or real you. And how this vasanas are get rid of is by Karma Yoga and Upasana Yoga. And then by contemplating on it, we know this real me, the real essence of me is the Atma Jnana. Always remember, Ishvara is not you. Ishvara is macro Upaadhi that can never be you. The essence in both you and the Ishvara is same, but both are never same. Next slide, please. So next we learned about what is called as important Bhaga Tyaga Lakshana. There are different ways of describing. When you say, where is your house? I say, my house is on the river Ganges. That doesn't mean it is sitting on the Ganges. You have to assume it is next to it. Similarly, When I say I ate banana, that doesn't mean I ate including peel. We have to remove the peel and eat the banana. Similarly, Soyam Devadatta is a beautiful verse which is a explained example which is taken. So somebody says, oh, this is Devadatta. Then you analyze, who is this Devadatta? Oh, the same person who was my classmate is Devadatta. You ask him, oh, you are from which place? Bangalore. Oh, which school? Carmel. Oh, which section? A section. Oh, who's your class teacher? Prema. Oh, me also same. Then we analyze and say, oh, you are that. There is not that boy which you have seen, Devadatta, and this boy has no resemblance at all. But still, there is something which is running through him, which is Devadatta. That is the essence of that is in you also. Next slide, please. And another important thing, doubt we get and which is clarified is this like heaven? In many systems we get heaven. Oh, you learn this, you do this Papa Punya, you do Agni Hotra Yoma, you'll go to heaven. So this knowledge is, okay, I will get Atma Gnana in next life. No, this Atma Gnanam, this even though it is indirect knowledge, it becomes direct knowledge. Once it becomes, this is it. So this is the Atma Gnanam. When you realize you are the 10th man, always you are the person you are looking for. You are not looking for anybody else. And when you realize that you are the real I, then there is no sorrow. That is when you find the 10th man, there is no suffering, there is no possessiveness, and happiness is here and now. Thank you very much. Namaste.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kiran, for giving us a very nice recap of all these verses that we studied in the last class. Sadashiva Samarambam Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om Namah Shri Shankarananda Guru Padambu Janmane Savilasa Mahamoha Graha Grasaika Karmane Atmanam Ched Vijaniyat Ayam Asmiti Purusha Kim Ichan Kasya Kamaya Shariram Anuswam Jvaret. We have come to the 8th session of trying to understand this Tripti Deepa, which is essentially an elaboration of this verse of the Vidyaranya Upanishad. Dr. Kiran just recapped these important verses from 59 to 80, where we have come to the climax. The climax is discovering our true nature through Mahavakya Vichara. In the process, we discover there are two kinds of words when we discover something new. One is called words of information. I want to know that infinite principle because of which this whole world has come into being. What is that infinite principle which sustains the world? What is that into which everything goes back? And so the teachers use the Upanishadic words. These are the Avantara Vakya, which describe that infinite principle is of the nature of Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, Brahma. And then when the vichara comes to a certain process and when the student is ready, the teacher will now give words of introduction. And these words of introduction are the Mahavakya. In the Mahavakya, there is no new information. In the Mahavakya, the teacher will directly convey to you, there is something in all of us, not your body, not your mind, but the essence of all of us is what we are looking for. And how do you discover that? Exactly what Dr. Kiran spoke about is called Bhaga Tyaga. I have to take away from me that which is impermanent. My body is impermanent, my mind is impermanent, my thoughts is impermanent, my emotions are important. Mano Buddhi Hankara Chittani Naham. Keep deleting all this. This process of deleting as the Tyaga process is called na iti or neti neti. And then once you go on negating, but there is someone who's observing, there is an observer. And what is the nature of that observer? And that comes from the statement of assertion. The teacher will assert the one who is observing, and this is the Guru's Vakya, Chidananda Rupaha Shivoham Shivoham. You are aware, you are listening. That listening principle in all of us is of the nature of Sat Chit Ananda, that listening principle is none other than Shivaha. And this is called Jivo Brahmaiva Napara. This is what we have learned in the last class. In the present class onwards, I'm going to give you a little overview. This happened from verse 80 onwards of last class, where a Purva Pakshi comes. In all these advanced texts, the teacher wants to know, have you understood? So he brings in an opposite Purva Paksha, a person who takes the opposite perspective and challenges the Siddhanta or the teacher. The teacher has said that you can get to know your true nature through Mahavakyas. That means when the teacher says Tat Tvam Asi, you should be able to understand Aham Brahmasmi, and this is called the Aparokshata Jnana. Now, if I want to know about something, let's say Kailash Manasarovar, I can get indirect knowledge through the internet and through various other sources. But I get real knowledge when I go there. That means I have used two different sources of knowledge. Initially, I had used Shabda Pramanam, and that is called Paroksha, and I got Paroksha Jnanam. And then one day when I travel to those places, when I see those objects with my sense organs, and that is called Aparoksha Jnanam. So there is a large school of teaching, which very soon Dr. Ravi Shankar will be talking about, is how is it possible to get this direct knowledge only through Shabda? That is what we will learn in today's class, that it is possible to get our true nature through scriptural verses themselves. There is no travel required. There is no special process to be done. Just listening to the teacher with your eyes and ears open, with, of course, Shraddha, and with an intellect that has been prepared. When the teacher says, Tat Tvam Asi, the student now knows. Then comes a question which will be discussed throughout this class by many speakers, is, can Brahman have an Upaadhi? Because we know Brahman is without any features whatsoever. And if there is something that has no special features, how do you get to know this Upaadhi? And finally, there's another statement that will come in today's class. When the student understands and says, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, you will realize you can say I only if there is an Upaadhi. Now, the real knowledge is without Upaadhi. That means if you take away your mind, the I disappears. And when the I is not there, who is there who's going to say, I am Brahman? These are very subtle aspects which one has to understand. And then we come a little later in today's classes. I did not want to bring these terms, but our teachers have brought in. They look a little challenging, what is called this Vritti Vyapti and Phala Vyapti. But in the process of understanding Vritti Vyapti and Phala Vyapti, we get to know how I get to know any knowledge, any worldly knowledge or spiritual knowledge, how knowledge happens. I will bank on what Swamiji keeps telling us all the time. And there is a certain quiz that he will give us by showing us his hand and asking you, you're able to see my hand. But is there something else that you can see in addition to my hand, which is not part of my hand, which is not a product of my hand, which is not a property of my hand, which is an independent entity? And he will give you a clue. It is because of that you are able to see my hand. And by now we know the answer. There is something else other than the hand because of which I'm able to see, is because there is light on my hand. Now suddenly we become enlightened to a fact that anything and everything I can see around is for one simple reason, because there is light on that. Otherwise, if there is no light which reflects off that, I will not be able to see. But then how do I get this knowledge? The light from that object falls into my eyes. Now I realize I'm able to see that object with light on it because my eyes are functioning. I'm able to see that object with light on it, not only because my eyes are functioning, but because my mind is also functioning. And my mind has been enlivened by the consciousness principle or Atma. And this is a teaching which we realized long back in Keno Upanishad. Pratibodha viditam matam. In every experience, can I come in touch with the experiencer? This whole journey from the object to the subject is an enlightenment process. And once you get there, a little illustration how knowledge happens. Whenever there is an object, it falls into the retina of the eye, and there the object is reduced to an image. From there, it is carried to the mind through a set of nerves. And in the mind, which is actually a computing process, which is the brain and the occipital cortex, I'm able to see that object. For example, I'm seeing the computer. This computer in front of me has become an image in my eye. It has become a thought in my brain. And this thought is enlivened by consciousness. And because this consciousness is through a medium, this consciousness is called the reflected consciousness. I want you to understand. Now, if I have to see this computer I can see because there is light on the computer or because the computer has its own light. All right. Now, this comes into my eyes as an image. In my mind, it comes as a thought. My mind is illumined by the Atma. That illumination in the Atma is now not the original illuminator. It is called the Chidabhasa. It is called the reflected consciousness. And therefore, any knowledge comes because of the thought, the vritti vyapti, and the pala vyapti. What happens for Brahman knowledge? When I get this knowledge, aham brahmasmi, I do need this thought. I got to know I am Brahman because the Guru has told me. And I have that Shraddha and I believe it. When the Guru has told me aham brahmasmi, that thought is called vritti vyapti. This vritti vyapti is illumined in my mind by the reflected consciousness. But now, the reflected consciousness is overwhelmed by the original consciousness or Atma. Now, when there is no gap between me and myself, this verse is called akhanda akara vritti, technical term, but sometimes we have to break our head to understand what is this akhandakara vritti. All this will be explained in today's class. I will conclude in just 1 minute by saying, in the Bhagavad Gita, there is a verse, Natad Basayati Surya na Shashanko na Pavakaha Yat Gatva na Nivartante Tat Dama Paramam Mama. Once you are able to get to that abode, there is no question of falling back. This beautiful mantra, na tatra suryo bhati, na chandra tarakam, nema vidyuto bhati, kutoya magnihi, tameva bantam anubhati sarvam. Because of the light of consciousness in me, I'm able to observe the arati, and through the light of the arati, I'm able to see the idol. And therefore, because of the light of consciousness in me, everything has come into existence, as in that beautiful 4th verse of Sri Dakshinamurti Stotra. There is one key part, Janami iti tameva bantam anubhati. Now, because of the light of consciousness, I first get to know me. Then I know I'm able to see this computer and the whole world around me. Opening verses of today's class will be explained to us by Dr. Ravi Shankar. Dr. Ravi Shankar, please.
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. The 81st verse is Swato Paroksha Jivasya Brahmatvam Abhivanchataha Nashyet Siddha Parokshatvam Iti Yuktor Mahatyayo. In the next slide, we understand that Swami Vidyaranya is trying to tell us that for one whose knowledge is self-evident and desires infinitude, Brahmatvam, argument that he may lose the existing direct experience itself is a wonder. Swami Vidyaranya says that a Jivatma who knows, who has the aparokshatva, the direct knowledge, he knows it. And now he wants the asamsaritva or brahmatvam. After doing extensive shravana, gets the paroksha jnana of Jivatma, Paramatma, Aikyam. So at the end of shravana, both the Jivatma and Paramatma become paroksha, which means Aikya is paroksha. And so the labha is that the parokshatva knowledge has come, but he has lost the aparokshatva status and he wanted brahmatva, which is gone. And therefore, Swami Vidyaranya says, Vakya Vichara should and has to give only aparoksha jnana. If that does not happen, we must continue shravana. The next verse is Vriddhim Isatatvo. In the next slide, we notice that Swami Vidyaranya very sarcastically says that we want to have good investments, but a Shishya, if he invests aparokshatva to get brahmatva and loses both, that becomes a laukika proverb rather than giving any knowledge. In the next slide, we notice the 83rd verse, antahkarana samavindo. In the next slide, we notice that this is actually a Purva Pakshi verse. Brahman, we know, is of the nature of consciousness. It is that intimate, self-evident I, aparoksha I. But the consciousness plus the mind, if the antahkarana becomes an upadhi, it becomes a aparoksha anubhava. Upadhi of, if there's no upadhi, if it is upadhi rahita or nirupadika, that Brahman should not be available for aparoksha anubhava is what the Purva Pakshi says. And therefore, he says that Paramatma, who is free from all the upadhis, should not have this aparokshatva status. And so the Purva Pakshi says, you can have Jiva aparoksha jnana, but how can you have Brahma aparoksha jnana? In the next verse, which is the 84th verse, Naivam Brahmavat Bodhasya. We understand the explanation of this by Swami Vidyaranya in the next slide, where Swami Vidyaranya says that Brahman does not have any upadhis. It is true. In the Paramarthika Drishti, upadhi abhava itself becomes an upadhi, like an empty glass differentiating itself from filled glasses, or a bald-headed person differentiating himself from people who have quite a lot of hair on their heads. We know that in the Paramarthika Drishti, there is no nirguna, no saguna, no jnana, no knower, and no known. However, in the Vyavaharika Avastha, there is a Vyavaharika Upadhi, which is Sopadika. And the Neti Prakriya is done for the Sharira Traya Abhava of this Upadhi to understand Brahma Jnana in the Vyavaharika Avastha. So in Vyavaharika Drishti, absence of guna, which is nirguna, itself becomes an upadhi. And this is made use of to understand Brahma Jnana. So a minded consciousness is Jiva and a mindless consciousness is Brahman. Brahman, I know aparokshataya, and I, the mindless consciousness, is Brahman. Here again, the Purva Pakshi says, I cannot accept Brahma aparoksha jnana through Mahavakya. What is it in Brahman that liberates me? We see in the next verse, which is the 85th verse, antahkarana Sahitya Rahitya bhavam vishishyate upadhir jiva bhavasya brahmayatasya nanyataha. In the next slide, we understand Swami Vidyaranya telling us that Brahman has a conditioning. The absence of all the shariras and the prapancha itself is a conditioning, like a barren land qualifies that barrenness as the absence of vegetation. Liberating Brahma Jnana is knowledge of that Brahman which has absence of all things as an adjective, like the prapancha upashamana. Turiya is nishprapancha Brahma. Aparoksha Brahma Jnana is possible only by excluding that mind, and therefore I have two status. With the mind, I get the Jiva status, and without the mind, I get Brahman status. Hari Om, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ravi Shankar. You had really difficult verses, which very briefly and very clearly you have explained. I would like to focus on the 85th verse. The 85th verse spoke about Brahman is unique in that it has no Upaadhi. Now we've been using the word Upaadhi, Upaadhi. Upaadhi means a medium of manifestation. Now Brahman is something that has no attributes whatsoever. And therefore, if there is any Upaadhi, it will bring in on some amount of limitations. But as Dr. Ravi Shankar explained, how we understand Brahman in the Vyavahara plane is something different from all of us. All of us have Upadhis. That which does not have any Upadhi itself becomes a distinguishing feature of Brahman. And therefore, you can identify as that which has no Upadhi whatsoever. Now we have this word called antahkarana Rahitya, antahkarana Sahitya. That means Brahman does not have antahkaranam, whereas the Jiva has got antahkaranam. Now, look at all our day-to-day experiences the moment when we are fast asleep. When we are fast asleep, our antahkarana, our upadhis, are temporarily not functioning. So we are pure Brahman in the way we are in deep sleep. Now the real downfall comes to us with the moment our antahkarana wakes up. And when we wake up, we become a jiva, we have become limited individual, and therefore we have avidya, we have kama, we have karma, we have samsara. Fortunately, the Guru has come into our lives and told us very clearly, this antahkarana, this mind, is mana eva manushyanam karana bandha mokshaye. It is only a means for you to transact. Don't give too much importance. Because of the mind, I discover I have this body. Because I discover I have this body, I have this family, I have these possessions. Now remember, the mind itself is only an instrument. And through the instrument, whatever I experience is mithya. Compared to me, I am satya. If this understanding is established, then I wake up with this mind, but I don't lose my Brahman status. And this is what is being Aham Brahma Asmi. Dr. Sachin will explain to us the next two important verses. Dr. Sachin, please.
Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. So the last two verses, which already has been explained, and the following three more verses will explain about Sopadika Brahman Upadhi. So even though Brahman is limitless and has no attributes, but to understand Brahman in our Vyavharika Jagat, we need to have some Upadhis or way to explain Brahman. So in the next slide, we see the 87th verse. Atadvyavrittirupena sakshadvitimukhena cha vedantanam pravritti syad Videtyacharya Bhashitam. So we see this verse is Vidyaranya's answer to Purva Pakshi's question from 86th verse, that how can an absence of thing be a Upadhi? He says Upadhi is given to identify just the Nama and Rupa of an object. And if the absence of Upadhi helps us to identify Brahman, then why not use this negative Upadhi? Abhava or absence can also serve as Upadhi in understanding Brahman in Vyavharika plane. And he further explains by giving some examples, like in this slide, we see empty brass vessels. One of them is empty, other are all filled. So just by tapping each and getting that negative or sound of absence of liquid, we find that particular vessel which is empty. And in the same way, we use the absence of Upadhi for identifying Brahman, which is attributeless. Only the Vyavharika plane, the samsara is full of attributes. The Jagat is Mithya, but Brahman is Satyam. He is attributeless. We go to the next slide. See, we have Mahavakyas to know, and there are many such Mahavakyas, both positive or negative, means with presence and absence of Upadhis. So Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, Brahman is a positive way of understanding uh, Brahman. In similar lines, in Mundaka Upanishad, na antapragnyam, na vaishya pragnam, which is actually a neti, a principle which is used to negate everything until Brahman is revealed. Next slide, sir. The correct question would be actually, when shall I claim myself as Brahman? So when I exclude myself from the mind, which in last verses also as explained, when I exclude myself from mind, then I claim that I am the Brahma Tattvam. The Brahma Tattvam in me is very clear to everyone. Here, Abhava is necessary to claim myself or the real self, as it is limitless. Still, even in the limitlessness, we use the word limit, again, a absence or a negative upadhi. So, understanding the Anantam, we still are using the limited entity here. But what we have to understand that, sir, just tap, sir, next. Yeah, coming to the proper Mahavakyas, Atat Avrutta Rupena. Here, Vyavrutta means negation of attributes, which is given as Brahma Pramanam in the first line of 87th shloka, which we chanted right now. In the second line, Vyakyavritti Vakya of none other than Adi Shankaracharya, in many scriptures are already given this, like in Vivek Vidhi Mukhencha, that is means from the scriptures this is taken. So first line is telling Brahma Pramana. The second part of this line is telling that Brahman can be described positively as Sat and Chit, negatively as Prapancha Upashamam. Have not got this Prapanchaha, that the world is not there for Brahman. Now, again, Purva Pakshi comes with another question in next slide. That is, when Aham is excluded from Aham Brahmasmi, then how can one claim Brahma? So Vidyaranya Swami divides this Aham into three components. He says Aham actually is made up of mind, the Chidabhasa, the mind, then the Chidabhasa and the Chit. So one is the RC, the mind is the RM, reflective medium, and finally the OC, the Chit. By excluding Aham, we only exclude the first two, mind and Chidabhasa. So that is, by here we claim the Chit by Bhaga. First the three components, and then Tyaga, removal of the two, Chidabhasa and mind principle. So the example of Brahman as substratum, as we see in this small photo, we can see that the roots alone is Brahman, the substratum. Rest, the trunk, branches, leaves, fruits and flowers are all Prapancha alone. So we move on to the next verse, and that is Antakaranasanthyagad Vashishte Chidatmani Aham Brahmeti Vakyena Brahmatvam Sakshi Nikshate. So what is left behind is Chidatma, Sakshini or Sakshi. In the Brahman status is recognized, which is limitless, and the limitation belong to mind and the Chidabhasa alone. RM and RC both are limited. Original consciousness is limitless. How does the student claim that? Aham Brahma iti Vakyanam. Aham Brahma Asmi. That is how he claims. In the next slide, we see the example of a sunlight reflected on a surface. So consider sunlight as original consciousness and the mirror as reflective medium, and the space which is lighted is reflective consciousness. And once we remove the mirror or the reflective medium, the reflective consciousness also is gone. So the two components are gone, but what remains is original consciousness. In the last slide, we see that how do we exclude this mind, which is very difficult? Is it possible by physically or mentally, by keeping on samadhi? No. With my understanding, I remove the mind. With the help of Shastra, with the Guru's help, by sheer understanding that I am the Paramatma, I am the Paramartika Satyam, higher order of understanding, and mind is the lower order. And so I become mindless. Mithya mind's presence or absence doesn't make any difference to me. Me means the higher me. By removing the mind by Tyaga and Mithyatva, mind is removed from the original consciousness. Thus, I claim Brahmatvam in Satya Chaitanyam through the statement Aham Brahmasmi. Hari Om. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sachin, for a very clear explanation of, again, particularly difficult verses. And you have used slides with nice illustrations to make this as simple and as understandable as possible. Now, Adi Swami Vidyaranya is appropriately using existing verses from Vakya Vritti of Adi Shankara to convey the points that how do we discover Brahman? And in this verse 87, he's trying to tell us that we can discover Brahman by two methods. What are the two methods? One is the neti method, the method of negating, and the other is by a positive method to be able to discover the existence Chidananda Rupaha Shivoham Shivoham. Again, the Purva Pakshi comes and says, now whenever you say, this is what I discussed in the introduction also, whenever you say Aham Brahmasmi, the Aham or the I has come into being. How did the I come into being? Only because of the Upaadhi or my mind. If my mind was not there, I would not be able to say I. And therefore, if you take away the I, there is no way you can say Aham Brahmasmi. Now, by now, we have this knowledge that whenever I say I is a mixture of three things, very nicely described by this example. What are the three things? I means original consciousness. I also means reflected consciousness. I also mean reflecting media. Now, with this understanding, I do a bhaga tyaga. I negate my mind. I negate the reflected consciousness. I still continue to say I, but this time I refer to the original consciousness or Atma. I will request Apeksha for the next two verses. Apeksha, please.
Hari Om, sir. So we'll start. Before I explain the next two verses, let me just give a brief introduction so that we understand the meaning. By now, we all accept that every knowledge takes place in the mind. You know, every knowledge that happens, it can only be generated or created through the application of the 6 pramanas. But some people say that knowledge can also be gained by intuition. So here, intuition, can it be a pramana for knowledge? It has to be no, because intuition can sometimes be right and intuition can sometimes be wrong. So always it cannot be taken as a pramana for a knowledge. So knowledge always takes place in the form of a thought, be it any knowledge, right? Even the sport that we are seeing, or a cricket match, or a cricket score table, or any other material knowledge or spiritual knowledge, it is always in the form of a thought. Next slide, sir. But very important thing to know is that every thought is not knowledge. But we always say every knowledge is in the form of thought only. And every knowledge is called vritti jnana. This terminology is important so that we know. Ahead we'll see what is vritti jnana, its importance. Mind, and so we know every knowledge is called vritti jnana. We know mind is always pervaded by the reflected consciousness, or chidabhasa as we say. Whether active or we are sleeping in dormant state or sushupti state, chidabhasa is always present in our mind. So by this we can conclude. Next slide, sir. If the mind is pervaded by chidabhasa, we can say that all the thoughts that come in the mind is pervaded by the chidabhasa only, right? We know that all thoughts is a modification of a mind only. So it is pervaded, all these thoughts are pervaded by chidabhasa. So vritti jnana has two components. Every knowledge has two components. One is the reflected medium, which is the thought. And second is the reflected consciousness, which is nothing but chidabhasa. So what is knowledge? We can conclude knowledge is equal to relevant thought plus reflected consciousness or chidabhasa. So what is pot knowledge? Pot knowledge becomes important because we'll see in the ahead slides is equal to pot thought plus reflected consciousness. Next slide, sir. Similarly, Brahma Jnana, Aham Brahmasmi, we say, right? It also has two components. One is Vritti Amsa, that is the Vritti thought that I am Brahman. And the second is the Chidavasa Amsa. All knowledge we know has two components. But in the case of Brahma Jnana, there's a very, very special part to it that only the thought part or the vritti part has a role to play in it in case of Brahma Jnana, while Chidavasa does not play any role. It is present, but it becomes redundant as we'll see ahead in examples. We know Chidavasa always lights up any other thought, but in case of Brahma Jnana, it has no role to play. Next slide, sir. So pot knowledge. So what is this pot knowledge? We are looking at a pot right now, right? In front of your screen, you can see. So to gain this pot knowledge, Vedanta says the mind goes out as a beam of a thought, like a torch, right? The light, a beam emerges from the torch light. Similarly, from our mind, a beam of a thought goes, and that is called Vritti Amsa, right? A ray comes out and it pervades the pot. So, sir earlier talked about Vritti Vyapti, right? So this is what it is. The Vritti Amsa, the thought that goes and it pervades the pot, this is called Vritti Vyapti. And when this Vritti or the thought pervades, since the thought is associated by Chidavasa, Chidavasa also pervades. So it is called as Chidavasa Vyapti or Phala Vyapti. Next slide, sir. So Vritti Vyapti here, that is the thought removes the Ajnana Vritti that we have. Chidavasa Vyapti helps in illuminating and makes the pot known to us. So because the ignorance is removed, it's gone because of the vritti thought that we have, and the object is illumined. Here in the case of a pot by Chidavasa, I have the knowledge that this is a pot. Next slide, sir. Now let's come to Brahma Jnana. So like I said earlier, Brahma Jnana, vritti or thought is very important for removing the ignorance from our mind. The Chidavasa, the reflected consciousness, be not illumine Brahman, and it cannot, because Brahman is the original consciousness. Now, how do we explain this? The next example will make it extremely clear. Next slide, sir. See, here in the picture, you can see the earth is there, then the moon is there, and the sun is there. So the moonlight is required to illumine the earth, which is no light. It's an inert matter, right? Just like the pot, it is an inert matter, no light by itself. But can we use this moonlight to illumine the sun, which is the original consciousness? The sunlight is responsible for the moonlight, right? So it's not possible nor needed that moonlight can illumine the sun. So moonlight is redundant in case of sun illumination. Similarly, Chidavasa is also, the reflected consciousness is redundant or has no role to play in case of original consciousness, that is the Brahman. Next slide, sir. There's one more example to explain this and make it very clear. In this picture, you can see a person is reading the book. So you require two factors for it. One is your eye and the light that is coming. But if I were to see the light that was coming, I will only use my eyes, right? Only eyes is required. Similarly, in case of Anatma also, two factors are required. That is thought and Chidavasa to actually know about Anatma. But to know about the Atma, you only need one factor, which is the thought. Next slide, sir. So in case of Brahma Jnana, Atma is self-evident. We do require a thought which refers to Atma. Only difference here is that the Sakshi is not illumined by Chidavasa. Chidavasa has no role to play. And therefore, the Vedanta Acharyas negate the Chidavasa and its function is negated. Next slide, sir. So now we'll go to the shloka 91 and 92, which was given to me. Buddhi tatastha chidha abhaso dvavapi vyapna unnato ghatam tatra jnanam diya nashya da abhasen ghata sphure. So Vidyaranya Swami here contrasts to Brahma Jnana with the pot Jnana. As we saw in the earlier slide about pot knowledge, the thought of the mind goes out and it pervades the pot. The ignorance, which is the avarna, is eliminated by this vritti or the thought. Because of Chidavasa, the reflected consciousness, the pot is illumined and it cannot be illumined by itself because the pot is jada here, right? It's inert, just like in the example of the earth also. So this is the case of pot knowledge. So through vritti and Chidavasa, we have the pot knowledge. Next slide, sir. Brahmanya Jnana Nashaye Vritti Vyaptir Apekshitaha Swam Swaran Rupatva Anna Abhasa Upyujyate. In the case of Brahman or the Brahma Jnana that we are talking, the thought Aham Brahmasmi is required to remove the Brahma Jnana that we have. But Chidabhasa cannot be utilized here because Brahman is not inert. It's not like the pot or the earth. It's the sun itself, right? So the Chidabhasa cannot, or the moonlight cannot illuminate the sun, or the Chidabhasa cannot illuminate the Brahman here. Because Brahman is self-effulgent, self-radiant, and already is self-evident. Hari Om, sir.
Thank you very much, Apeksha. This is absolutely wonderful. When these verses were allotted, I was really wondering how someone can explain these verses, and we are so grateful to our teacher, Swami Paramarthananda. So grateful to Vidyaranya Swami, who so poetically brought out this understanding. And thanks to our teacher, and Apeksha herself is a mother of 2 small children. But then if you can sit on these verses and break your head to see how you can understand and explain, that is the whole purpose of this exercise, that whenever we make an effort, this subtle knowledge can become our understanding. What are we trying to understand through these verses? When we study Vedanta, there are certain scriptural statements which say, Yato va nivartante aprapya manasa saha. Yato va nivartante aprapya manasa saha. Brahman knowledge is about one thing where the mind and the speech have no access to. And yet, we get Brahma Jnanam only through the mind and sense organs. And this is also said in some other Upanishads like the Katha Upanishad. How is it possible? Vidyaranya, through these 2 verses, it talks about Vritti Vyapti and Phala Vyapti to understand how we get to know anything. To get to know anything, any knowledge requires a thought. And this thought is possible because of our mind. And this mind is enlivened by our Chidabhasa. So to know anything, we need our thought, which technically is called Vritti Vyapti. And we need a certain amount of consciousness, which is the reflected consciousness, which is called the Chidabhasa. Now, but whenever we have that thought of Brahma Jnanam comes to us in the form of Aham Brahma Asmi. How do I get this thought? Through my teacher. The teacher has told me, you are that. And when that thought is registered in my mind, that Vritti Vyapti is Aham Brahma Asmi, which is registered in my mind. Who illumines this? Of course, my Chidabhasa. But my Chidabhasa is talking about the light from the original consciousness. Although the Chidabhasa is telling you that, but now we are talking about the original consciousness, just like Apeksha showed the moon and the sun. Now, because of the moonlight, I'm able to see. But then what am I seeing? The sun. And therefore, the Chidabhasa has become irrelevant. We will have a little more discussion on this by Dr. Aksha. Dr. Aksha, please.
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. When we want to see the pot here, as in verse 93, Chakshur Deepa Vapikshete, we need both the eye, which is compared to the thought, and light, which is compared to Chidabhasa. This is because the pot is not self-luminous. On the other hand, Deepa Darshane, to see the light, we don't need another torchlight. We need only the eye. Similarly, in Brahma Jnana, only Vritti Vyapti is enough. In the next 3 verses, Swami Vidyaranya makes it very clear that Chidabhasa is formed in the case of Brahma Jnana. Even though it does really exist, it is mixed with the light of Brahman. It is like the beam of moonlight, which is directed towards the sunlight, and moonlight will join the sunlight, but it will not increase the intensity of the sunlight. Chidabhasa merges with the Chit. Next slide, sir. Swami Vidyaranya explains how Aparoksha Jnanam, Aham Brahmasmi, rises in the mind of a Shishya when he does proper Mahavakya Vichara under the guidance of a competent Acharya. A thought arises in the case of worldly knowledge in relation to the object of the knowledge, and also in the spiritual knowledge, a thought arises here. It is Akhanda Akara Vritti. The thought alone removes the ignorance covering the object, and the function of the thought is Ajnana Nivritti. In the worldly knowledge, the thought removes Vishaya Avaraka Ajnana. In the spiritual knowledge, it removes Brahma Avaraka Ajnana. There is no difference in both the material knowledge and Brahma Jnana. In both, reflected consciousness formation takes place. The only difference here is, in the case of worldly knowledge, the objects are inert and they cannot reveal themselves, and something is required to illumine them. And that is the reflected consciousness. RC has a role to play, and it is called Phala Vyapti. In spiritual knowledge, the reflected consciousness has no role because Brahman happens to be the original consciousness. This is like moonlight, which is not needed to illumine the sunlight. Two statements are contradictory here. From Vritti Vyapti angle, mind is required as thought alone removes ignorance. From the standpoint of ignorance removal, mind is required. And at the same time, from the standpoint of illumining Brahman, mind is not required as Brahman is self-effulgent. This is the essence of this shloka, Aham Brahmasmi. In verse 96, Swami Vidyaranya reiterates the first sentence, Atmanam Chet Vijaniya. It is Aparoksha Jnana, because in this knowledge, a person specifies Brahman not as a general object somewhere, but Jnani specifies Brahman as himself. That Jagat Karana Brahman Aham Asmi, and specifying this I is Aparoksha Jnana. Swami Vidyaranya concludes Mahavakya Vichara with this verse, which had started in verse 70. And now he talks about the obstacles for this Jnana from verse 97. Vedantic students ask how Jnana gives samsara nivritti. There is some gap between Jnana Prapti and Jnana Phala Prapti. The mind creates certain obstacles and does not allow Jnana to do its job. This is like light is burning, but still the darkness has not gone. Means the burning light is covered by something. Such obstacles in the mind are called antahkarana dosha. Obstacles are creation of our own mind, and knowledge is not allowed to do its job. This is called Sapratibandha Aparoksha Jnana. The three types of obstacles seen here are, the first one is Pramana Asambhavana. Here, the reservation is regarding the essential teaching of Vedanta, as to whether Vedanta says you are Paramatma, or you are part of Paramatma, or you are Dasa of Paramatma. These reservations create a doubt, and with repeated analysis of the teaching, it gets cleared. Upanishad does not have any intention other than saying that you are the truth of the world. And this is not production of knowledge, but removal of the obstacle. The second obstacle is the reservation regarding the nature of Brahman. Upanishad says, I am the non-dual Advaita Atma. Sense organs report plurality, while Vedanta says that I am non-dual. Pratyaksha Pramana says, I am a part of duality, but Shastra Pramana says, I am non-dual. We cannot dismiss Pratyaksha Pramana, which is a primary source of knowledge. Both are powerful, Pratyaksha and Shastra Pramana. Sense organs work in the Vyavaharik field, whereas Vedanta functions in the Paramarthik field. Vedanta does not say there is Advaita in Vyavaharik plane. Veda accepts Dvaita. Pratyaksha cannot contradict Paramarthik as it cannot function in the Paramarthik field. So when we say Advaita, it is in the Paramarthik plane and Pratyaksha is valid for the Vyavaharik plane. The third obstacle being the Viparita Bhavana or habitual non-Vedantic thinking. The conception of I in the mind is Sangha, and I that is described in Vedanta is Asanga. The conventional I and the Vedantic I are different. We have to make the first I feebler and allow the other I to dominate. Vedanta is meant to weaken ahankara and dominate aham. And this is Viparita Bhavana Nivrutti. If people come to Vedanta after sadhana chatushtaya sampatti, then obstacles will not be there. It is like switching on the light and the darkness disappearing immediately. Once the obstacles go, apratibandha jnana replaces sapratibandha jnana. Thank you, sir. Hari Om.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aksha, for another excellent explanation of two important aspects. The first was about continuation of what Apeksha had spoken about. What is this vritti vyapti? What is phala vyapti? How do I get that knowledge that you have very nicely and very clearly explained? Then we came to another new topic about Astu Bodho. Astu Bodho is our Puru Pakshi coming. Okay, you have got this knowledge. What next? It is like, I'm not sure if I've said this before, if an ordinary worker, I've spoken about a toll booth worker who's struggling with the clients who refuse to pay the toll every day, suddenly gets a lottery of, let's say, $1.5 billion, which is around, let's say, 15 or 14,000 crores. Now, supposing such a person who was struggling with his life suddenly becomes so rich, now won't his outlook to life be transformed? Now, when you get Brahma Jnanam, now it is not about $1 or $2 billion, it is inheriting the whole universe. The whole universe is now in you. Now, this kind of knowledge should absolutely transform, and we cannot be the same. But when you look at our lives, what difference has it made? Yeah, Aham Brahmasmi is just another one more knowledge. Now we realize this, Vidyaranya Swami says, it is because of sa-pratibandha, or this knowledge is mixed with various obstacles, and it is not drida or firm. In the next 30 odd verses, which will be explained to us by Padma, the beginning ones will come by Padma, will tell us, you know, what are these obstacles and how to work on them. Padma, please.
Hari Om, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. In verse 98, Shankaracharya's Vyakyavritti says, even after deliberating on Mahavakya, Aham Brahman, and attaining Aparoksha Jnanam, the knowledge is not firm in the mind. By following external and internal prescribed disciplines, sadhana, chatushtaya sampatti, till this knowledge becomes one's true nature with repeated shravanam, mananam, and nididhyas. Verse 99. In spite of scriptures and Guru's teachings, one is unable to come to Aham Brahma Asmi due to lack of firmness of absorbing Brahma Vidya. This is due to the obstacles created within the mind, called antahkaran dosa. And knowledge is clouded, not allowed to function, is called sapratibandha aparoksha jnana. Example, if there's darkness in the room, in spite of lit lamp, it is because the lamp is covered by dust. That is to say, knowledge is clouded with doubts and there is no clarity. There are many obstacles that make it possible to firmness or instability that prevent the abidance of self-knowledge of Brahman. And the three main obstacles are Pramana Asambhavana, Shruti Anitya, which is confusion about what the scriptures teach. Because of manifoldness or contradictory statements of scriptural interpretation or lack of faith in the scriptures or Guru or both. Again, because of different versions, sometimes quite contradictory. to cite a couple of examples. Does Vedanta teach Dvaita or Advaita? Scholars have debated this for over 2000 years. Ramanuja and other Dvaita scholars have tremendously debated powerful arguments which go against Advaita, Vedanta, while Shankaracharya propagates Advaita, and teachings of both Ramanuja and Shankaracharya are based on the same Upanishads. And then some Vedic statements like Jivatma and Paramatma is one and the same, that is Jivatma Paramatma Aikyam. The body of an individual has both Jivatma and Paramatma, indicating both are different. Then the next, in Bhagavad Gita, it is said, Jivatma is Amsha of Ishvara. So the dilemma is, am I one with God, or am I one different from God, or am I part of God? This is Pramana Asambhavana. One is lost in the maze of many voices of scriptural interpretation, confusion regarding the Upanishad teachings, difficulty in ascertaining the correct meaning. Prameya Asambhavana. Here it is confusion about the subject matter of the scriptures, which is Jiva, Jagat, and Ishvara. Not clear about who am I. Impossible to accept I am Brahman. Brahma Satyam and Jagan Vidya. The third one, Viparita Bhavana. A feeling or notion which is contrary to reality is the literal meaning of Viparita Bhavana. Example, we have sunrise and sunset, giving the notion the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. Although in reality the sun is stationary and earth revolves around it. Then we have the body-mind complex. I possess the body, but I'm not the body. I possess the mind, but I'm not the mind. A feeling which is contrary to reality. And Swami Paramarthanandaji says, even after Shravanam, Mananam, and Nididhyasanam, our powerful tendencies formed over innumerable lifetimes don't allow us to come to terms with our real nature. Swami Vidyaranya says, self-discovery takes place due to Mahavakya, and repeated Shravanam, Mananam are required for firmness of this knowledge. Next, verse 101. This verse speaks of the purpose of Shravanam. Next slide, sir. The ancient sages and rishis of yore wanted to convey through the Upanishads, Brahmatmaneva Tatparyam iti dihi. Shravanam is dihi, knowledge, and Tatparyam, the intended meaning of Vedantic teachings, or of all Upanishads by gurus. The rishis wanted to convey the Tatparyam, the intended meaning of the Upanishads, in the beginning, the middle, and the end of the Upanishads, that is, throughout the scriptures. Only one thought sought to be established throughout, Brahmam Atmaneva, that Atma and Brahma are one and the same. This being the central message of the gurus to discover and ascertain this path is Shravanam. Shravanam is for the sake of removing lack of clarity about what the scriptures teach. Shravanam can be defined as the Sadalinga Vichara, an inquiry into the sixfold process for arriving at oneness of consciousness, that is through Sadalinga Dwara. First one, Upakarma Upasamhara, what the Upanishads say in the beginning and at the end, that is throughout the Upanishad. Second one, Abhyasa, repetition of oneness of Brahman, that is Tattvam Asi. Third, Apurvata, that is knowledge of Brahman is knowable only through the Upanishads or Vedas alone. Fourth, Arthavada, establishment of greatness of Brahma Jnana. Fifth one, Phalam, attainment of Brahma Jnanam, that is moksha. Adi Shankaracharya says, Jnanam eva mokshaha, that is, moksha is nothing but gaining knowledge. Upapati, logic used to establish oneness of Atman or Brahman, logic like ocean and waves, clay and pot. Repeated Shravanam, Mananam, and Nididhyasanam is required to fill or clear the gap between Jnana Prapti and come to Jnana Phalam, that is Aham Brahma Asmi. Thank you, sir. Hari Om.
Thank you very much, Padma, for explaining to us that key aspect to say, I have got Brahma Vidya, I have got Jnanam, but now I need Jnana Nishta. What are the obstacles and how I go about that? that we will see it in our future classes. Pannaga, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hegde, sir, and all our distinguished speakers. Our salutations to Vidyaranya Swami. How can we know the Brahman who is free of all upadhis? Vidyaranya Swami points out that the very absence of upadhi or features or attributes or medium is also a way of knowing. Like the popular statement, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The realization of my true nature, the ever-evident self, takes place with the help of a special Shabda Pramanam called Mahavakya that is taken by us as a special thought in our mind by the Guru called Akhanda Atma Akara Vritti. Reflected consciousness has no role and need not play a role to illuminate the self-illuminating self. The technicality of how we get the self-knowledge is given in these verses. We also learned about the three obstacles between having Gnanam and not experiencing its phalam. Vidyaranya Swami will speak in detail about the third obstacle, that is our vasanas or viparita bhavana, how habitual or the non-Vedantic way of thinking come in the way of being established in the knowledge that we have received and how to overcome it slowly but surely. In the next session, session 9 of Tripti Deepa will be premiered next Monday, the 4th of September 2023. With that, we conclude today's class. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om Tat Sat. Thank you.